Greetings. It's Mother's Day in the age of coronavirus, year 2020. And so the reading for today is chapter 54, part 1, Lourdes Water. There's some scenes that take place there in a retirement home. And today I've gotten off the phone with my friend Miss Dolly, whom I'm reading this for, and others who aren't able to read themselves, but they can listen. And she reports that they're fine where they are in the retirement home down the road from them. There have been 4 deaths, and currently there are 7 active cases as the state looks to open up. She's in North Carolina. My parents are well, although they're separated. So to all the mothers out there, and to the dads as well, we salute you. And let's start with the reading. By the way, these are the Zinfandel vines you're seeing here in the picture. Those are actually, that's our vineyard. And Bluey the dog, keeping a watch, probably for birds is what he's looking for, since the grapes are getting ripe there. All right, let's get started. So this is chapter 54, Lourdes Water. I'm going to read the first part of this chapter. There's a time for everything under the vine, a time to water, a time to thin, a time to prune, a time to pick. So it was with the winemakers in Hidden Hills. One had Alzheimer's, so agitated and disoriented he became. As the time approached to put him safely away, removing him from his vines, he made a desperate call to Paul with a plea to take care of his grapes. Lum sold his vineyard and walked with the cane. And Mick Dragoo, a mentor to so many San Diego winemakers, in the fullness of life, without warning, suddenly died of a heart attack days before his 72nd birthday. God, life is short. Hundreds of well-wishers attended his memorial celebration at Belmarie Winery. His life as a brilliant oral surgeon, instructor, balloonist, winemaker, husband, father, lover of life, had touched so many people. The year Carrie Ann reconnoitered Texas Hill Country wineries, she noticed dangerous pests in a vineyard. She warned the manager, "I'd do something about those sharpshooters if I were you." "We're organic," he replied. "Good luck with that." When she returned a few years later scouting for land, she took Jenny Lee with her to show her the scenic winery and found the rolling slope eerily vacant. Carrie Ann wondered if she was in the wrong place, but the sign on the gated entrance indicated they were in the right location. "What happened?" Carrie Ann asked the vineyard manager. "Pierce's disease. I told you to do something about those sharpshooters." The only vines remaining were walking sticks carved from dead vines for sale in the tasting room. Paul approached the vine named Richard, after his wheelchair-bound friend with Parkinson's, who planted the vine that became the cornerstone during the vineyard's christening. When Pope Jean Paul II returned to the heavenly kingdom, Paul beseeched the deceased pope to bestow mercy and cure a fellow sufferer of Parkinson's, as a sign for all people of the healing power and grace of the Lord in this day and age. Alas, Richard joined the Pope, while the vine he planted struggled for 10 years until it put forth no shoots. Should Paul dig it out and place it along the French terrace as a constant reminder of his friend? Return it to Richard's widow, or burn it and spread the ashes among the living vines? A few weeks later, Paul was trimming oak and pepper trees with a chainsaw, walked by the dead vine, paused, and cut it down. It was time to move on, although he and Sheila continued to call that area Richard to honor their friend. Paul's father offered his surfboard to Alex, who hesitated. "Grandpa, why don't you keep it for the next time we go surfing?" "Because there won't be a next time, and I want you to have it." There was a time to mourn and a time to live, a time to plant and a time to cut. When is it time to give up your vineyard? Paul always said he wanted to work in the vineyard until his 80s as a source of exercise and activity after retiring from his daytime job. Sheila was ready to move into an apartment, although she didn't want to sell their property. She wanted to keep it for Kate and Alex, who showed no interest in taking it over. Meantime, the vines needed spraying, and Paul prepared for combat, for if mildew were not routed out immediately, the whole crop would be destroyed. As he worked, he thought of Mary France, and her stories of Le Débarquement, and the heroes who landed on Normandy's beaches in 1944, who engaged in battles that rose above history's clouds, an invasion of invasions, D-Day, and the least he could do was remember their hardship and sacrifice. So what if he couldn't see clearly through the fog of his goggles as he pumped the backpack sprayer? So what if his clothes were damp from morning drizzle? So what if his sinuses hurt from goggles pressing against his face? Did this compare to landing on an open beach under machine gun fire? Not at all. He continued. He pumped the sprayer. He pulled the trigger. He fought. He fired on enemy positions behind every leaf and cluster. He lined surviving mildew guys against the wall. Take no prisoners. Each sprayed, gunned done, killed. The mildew, as usual, was concentrated in the lower part of the vineyard, because that's where the rich topsoil was, and the vines grew strong, too thick, too dense, and the leach field nourished vines who should have been servants to the winemaker, but rose up, protesting their captivity behind wires. Some broke out, escaped, yearning to be free, but were recaptured by the bounty hunter who reined them in, and those who did not obey were summarily cut, hedged on the spot into submission, Paul leaving a green line of cuttings, juicy shoots and fresh leaves, a trail of tears for his wife, who bent down to clean up after the rabbits had their fill. For a man who hadn't served, this was his battle, his fight, his test to prove his manhood. And when he framed working in the vineyard as the moral equivalent of war, he didn't stop until the last vine of the last row had been inspected, cleared, and was safe. His vineyard struggle required the same diligence as fighting an insurgency. There was rarely time to relax. Vigilance was required, and the vineyardista, too, would not stop, could not stop, until the work was done. And with a vineyard, the work is never finished, and she never relaxed until the sun was down and a glass of wine soothed her until dawn, when she woke to continue her toil. Paul returned to Paris on business, and to celebrate Steph's 5th year without cancer, to spend an afternoon with Jane, and to visit Mary France, whom he presented with a bottle of Petit Syrah. "I like a good Syrah," she said, delighted with the gift. He didn't tell her, "This isn't Syrah. This was invented by France's Dr. Durif, as a variation of Syrah to resist mildew." He could never win an argument against her. The important thing was to show his gratitude with the gift of wine, made from his hands, she inspired. When Paul returned home, he sent her a letter, because she didn't use the internet. And since spraying the vines caused him to think about her, he telephoned. "Paul, dear, is that you? It's so nice to hear from you. I loved your letter. We're so proud of you. You should write a book about all your experiences." "That's what everybody says. I'm now lecturing tour groups that visit Normandy. I tell them about the war and my life." "I'd love to attend your talk." "You better hurry up. My mind is good, but my carcass isn't. I may not be here much longer. It's time to get ready for the big barbecue. How's Sheila?" "You're twice her age and twice as healthy. She's been getting better and may outlive us all. She's strong-willed, like you." "Listen, dear, I may never talk with you again." "Don't say that. I'm coming to France to see your lecture and visit the brandy makers of Armagnac." "Thank you so much for calling. Take care." "Au revoir," he said. "See you again," because she asked him never to say goodbye. "Je t'embrasse." Here's the letter he wrote. Chère Mary France, I'm thinking about you this week, the 70th anniversary of D-Day, the 6 juin, the débarquement. You are grateful pour les Américains and tell stories of the 82nd Airborne parachuting over Saint-Mère-Église, and Private Murphy hanging from a church steeple by his parachute, and Father Wood with his cricket, all scenes featured in the movie Le Jour le Plus Long. You heard the stories firsthand from the heroes who were there, and you and your sister both met and fell in love with GIs, married, and moved to the United States, and your 2 sons served in Vietnam. What a story! And your local newspaper knows your histoire and interviewed you for an article about the river cruise company that stops near your house in Vernon, and you lecture passengers about your memories, and they soak up your words like the bread I used to sop, la sauce à la moutarde you taught me to make to accompany lapin. Did you see it on the news over there? You asked. I reassured you President Obama would be there for the ceremony. You were disappointed. Many people, especially the young, don't know these important events. For that matter, do you remember each year the Battle of Yorktown in 1781, and your countrymen from France who made General Washington's victory over the British possible? Our 2 countries are old friends. Our people share so much in common. We will always be great allies. After you moved to America as a war bride, you became friends with my parents. You changed my diapers, fed me escargot, and gave me a sip of wine diluted with water that changed my life forever. Time passed, and you returned to France, and you and your Bob purchased a country house in Normandy, not far from Monet's old house, and it was a dream come true until shattered when he died of a heart attack on the streets of Paris, and you didn't know how you would live another day. That was almost 40 years ago, and here you are, entertaining cruise ships. After graduating from college, I visited your Normandy house the first week of June, and you generously loaned me your car and told me the places to visit and what to do, and I made it my pilgrimage to Saint-Mère-Église and the landing beaches and the sea of symmetric white crosses and stars of David perfectly aligned, unlike my row of vines. You suggested I see the tapestry at Bayeux to learn about Normandy's Viking heritage. What I most remember about my D-Day tour was Father Wood himself, who returned to France to baptize your grandson, and we took Father Wood to Giverny to see Monet's restored house and the water lilies and Le Pont Japonais, and I basked in the presence of history. Before every dinner we had an aperitif, usually white wine infused with crème de cassis or mûre, and on special occasions there was Kir Royale with champagne, and there was always red wine with dinner. You are a legendary cook, and you taught me how to make wine-infused beef stew, and the copper skillet you gave me hangs on my wall as a fond souvenir. You taught me how to tie an empty bottle to a tree and grow a pear inside, and of course you introduced me to the elixir Noyer de Vernon, distilled from apricot pits, and the local Calvados, stiff brandy distilled from apple mash. Look at me now, distilling my own. We're making an American version of Armagnac, and we look forward to visiting France to meet the distillers and see you again soon. When you introduce me to people, you tell them, he used to bring me his dirty laundry and I told him what he could do with it. I suppose that's just because I thought of you as Mom, and I say the same thing to Kate and Alex when they arrive with dirty clothes. Our families were such good friends that when my parents went on vacation, you volunteered to take care of their chien, who knocked up your dog, and we remained friends through health and through sickness, good times and bad, and even a scandalous dog. 8 years ago, you visited San Francisco, and I flew up to see you, and I knew enough about wine that when we went to an Italian restaurant, I ordered Nebbiolo. I brought you a barrel sample of our first Syrah, and you told me you like a good Syrah, and I poured you a glassful from the plastic bottle I bootlegged into a fine San Francisco restaurant. The Queen of the Vineyard appreciates the way you treat me like a kid and put me in my place like a domineering mother. She wished she could control me like that. Whenever I spoke French in your presence, I was justly criticized for butchering your beautiful language, so I just gave up speaking it with you. Besides, your English is too good. About that wine I gave you. When we met for lunch at La Coupole last month, I presented you with a bottle of our 2011 Petit Syrah, the darkest, most delicious wine we ever made, and it was a pleasure to carry it all the way to you. The bootlegger's express always delivers. This is not like the wines we used to drink in your home, at least how I remember them. It's more in the California style, and the fruit seems to taste sweet, although there is no sugar in the wine, which is fermented to dryness. I once had a 2009 Gaillac from France that was similar in its syrupy texture and bold taste. You proposed a toast, with a tear in your eye. Next month is June 6th, and I want everyone to remember that 70 years ago the GIs and my husband Bob landed in Normandy. If it hadn't been for them, we wouldn't be here today. I know you miss your Bob and his comrades, and your heart is aching as you remember their sacrifice to liberate France. I know with your health it's a struggle, and I thank you for staying with us. With the love and gratitude always, je t'embrasse, and see you again soon. Your petit Américain, Paul. Paul drove to his parents' retirement complex, and in the parking lot saw their neighbors heading out, greeted them politely, and asked where they were headed. To a social engagement. Is the opera in town? We're going to a funeral. Isn't that what assisted living communities are in the end? A soylent green conveyor belt? When Paul was inside his parents' apartment, he reminded his father to vote in the upcoming primary, and they started talking politics. Do you remember when you were 18 years old and we took you to Richmond to see my parents? His dad asked. How could I remember if I was drunk from sipping your old-fashioned? We drove up to Washington, D.C. to attend the inauguration of President Kennedy. I don't remember. You don't remember him? I don't remember being there. I do remember when he was assassinated, and during his funeral, his son, about my age, kissed the casket. It made me sad. When we left D.C., we caught in a terrific snowstorm and had to pull over. While we were on the side of the road, we saw Eisenhower. His motorcade passed right by us. He waved at us, and we waved back. You too. I guess I've been walking in history's footsteps my whole life. Son, everyone walks in the footsteps of history. I'm glad I've had the chance to walk in your steps. We're proud of you. And we're proud of you children, all of you, and our grandchildren. We've had a wonderful life. And with that, Paul got up to pour out a glass of red wine he made for his father's heart, and a martini for his mother's soul. After the warm-up drink, his parents invited Paul to accompany them to their friend's apartment for a neighbor's happy hour before dinner, where Paul heard an organ recital, as each man took turns talking about his prostate, heart, lungs, kidneys, knees, or hips. I'm getting up 4 times a night, said one. You should try Pinot Noir wine, Paul suggested. The doctor said I should try surgery. It looks like I need to get a mitral valve replaced, said another. Good thing you can do that now with the Roto-Rooter and not open heart surgery, said Jimmy. My wife's Alzheimer's getting worse, said another. I'm glad we moved here. My wife's medication isn't working. She's really off, said another. He overheard a man tell his father, You shouldn't be afraid to move to assisted living. The care is excellent there. I'm scheduled to get my knee replaced next week, said another. Your body parts start falling apart when you're 80, another advised Paul. Who says you can't predict the future? It was right there in front of him. A woman lifted a martini glass towards her mouth, but her hand shook like a winemaker jiggling a siphon hose. Paul reached for the glass to assist. Are you all right? I'm wonderful, dear. I don't have Parkinson's, just bad nerves. After I finish that drink, my nerves will calm down, and I'll be able to feed myself at the dinner table. I'm grateful for this day and to be alive. Paul noticed his mother sitting in a love seat, showing the man next to her how to use an app on her phone. Are they flirting? When they finished, she stood up, walked over to Paul's father, and announced, I want you to know I've a new number 2. Paul was dumbfounded by the discourtesy of that statement spoken directly to his father's face, but withheld comment when he realized he had calculated his own numbers 2, 3, and 4. Why don't you join us for yoga tomorrow? One of the gents suggested to Paul. I think you like our new instructor." Paul woke early the next morning, drove to the retirement home, and joined his parents and other residents as they gathered for class. A woman younger than her students approached Paul. "Good morning. I'm Julie. I've heard you'd be joining us today." Paul rose to shake her hand. "Please stay seated," she said. "My father taught me to always stand to greet a lady," replied Paul as he shook her hand and looked into her eyes. She smiled warmly, crow's feet etched between her eye slits and ears, and Paul, who was either falling in love with the woman or wasn't, felt the tug of affection. "I'd love to try your wine," she said. "Everyone told me how good it is." The day's program was chair yoga, whose purpose was to assist the octogenarians maintain balance, strength, and coordinate their breathing with movement to foster relaxation. Paul read the pamphlet, Exercises for Flexibility. Julie left on each chair, noticing she had a Ph.D. and was a licensed nurse practitioner. She wore a tight leotard top and was as well endowed as the cougar. She moved with the grace of a ballerina and the serenity of a yogi who had achieved inner peace. He guessed her age. She was older than he and younger than his parents. If he split the difference, that would put her in her early 70s. By the end of the session, Paul concluded, to borrow Carrie Ann's phrase, "I could date her." As he drove to work, Paul thought, maybe if I live that long, I'll be the last man standing and the rooster of the chicken coop. And he thought of Julie. Maybe old age didn't need to be an organ recital, at least not yet. There could be a last tango, perhaps in Paris. He'd take good care of himself, eat better, exercise more, and live life like a marathon, a slow and steady tortoise, to reach the finish. One man approaching the finish line was Leroy, his father's Disney colleague and army buddy. Leroy was deteriorating from cancer, and Jimmy flew to St. Louis to visit. They weren't exactly two old dogs barking with delight, backs wiggling on the floor like the final time Jimmy and Bluey met, but they fondly recalled their days at Disney and the good times they shared in Paris and Korea. The opposite sides of the same track merged to ride the train into the sunset. They both detested hypocrisy and bigotry, and were concerned about the direction of public discourse in the wake of Michael Brown's recent shooting by police in neighboring Ferguson. "The community needs you now more than ever," Jimmy said. "It pains my heart we've yet to reach the promised land." "You're almost there, brother." "I've got news for you," Jimmy said. "What's that?" "I always wondered if we were related, so I had my DNA tested. I'm 10% African American. Old Pops must be rolling in his grave." "We were always brothers," said Leroy. "I wish people could just get along like us." "Amen, brother. Amen." They hugged, exchanged stories and lies for the afternoon, and said their farewells over a bottle of wine Paul gave his father to carry to Leroy, keeping his promise to Keisha.